Welcome to lecture 47, which is on supervised classification methods. In this lecture, we'll explain, once we have learned all the transformation enhancement, how we are getting the land use or land cover classification from the satellite images using supervised classification techniques. So let's begin this. So in the image classification method, we know that there are two broad methods. One is the visual interpretation method, another is the digital interpretation method. So you have already learned how to carry out visual interpretation from the satellite image. Now in digital interpretation method, what you need is a digital image and you need some kind of a software, or you have to develop your own routine in order to carry out the classification of the data. Now what it involves? It involves actually the DN value of the pixel. So pixel by pixel, it will take consideration into the DN values and then try to carry out some kind of a mathematical uh, transformation on the decisions about the DN values, so that they could be classified into certain classes based on certain knowledge, based on certain rules. So this is what you are doing in digital interpretation or classification from the satellite image. So when we are doing digital image classification, our objective is that whatever pixels are present, if there are n number of pixels which are present in the image, all pixels are to be classified into different homogeneous classes. So there could be several homogeneous classes within a given area. It is quite likely, and we will like to partition those images into their homogeneous classes based on the DN values and the reflectance characteristics. And the classification of that will largely depend upon the distribution of the DN values which is present in the data sets. There could be spectral similar classes where there will be some kind of a confusion, and there could be similar classes, or there could be two different classes which are identified into the similar classes. So there are two similar classes which are identified into two dissimilar classes. So there could be some confusion when you are classifying the image. So it is very important that your classification is accurate and you are trying to select the homogeneous area when you are ultimately getting the results. So when we are doing the pixel based classification, here we are explaining that only digital. So there are several classification methods. So one could be the supervised method, second could be the unsupervised method, which you will learn in the next lecture. Today you will learn the supervised classification technique. So many other techniques also in the literature, if you find object based classification may be there, a neural network, artificial neural network, or the deep learning techniques, they are coming very fast now as far as the image processing work is also concerned. So you find that there are very large number of techniques nowadays available in the literature, but in this lecture we will confine ourselves to the supervised classification technique and unsupervised classification technique, which will be covered in the next lecture. So what all these techniques, what they are doing is they are partitioning the whole image. They are dividing the whole image into the homogeneous classes. As you can see here, that this is class A and this is class B, and both are now different as far as their DN values are concerned. Any technique we take, any classification method we take, there are certain general rules which we have to follow. There are steps. The first step is normally the field reconnaissance, the familiarity with the area. We should know what are the different kind of features likely to be present, are to be present, what is the topography of the region, what is the size of those features, what is the orientation. So field reconnaissance will collect all that information. Then development of a classification scheme. So we should know that how many classes we are going to identify, how many classes we are going to get at the end from this classification. So a classification scheme is very much necessary, and Anderson has given classification scheme which is level 1 to level 4 classifications are there, from very broad classifications to level 4 which is the detailed classification. So at what level of classification is required, then if there is image enhancement required, we carry out that image enhancement, image transformation, we select a proper classification algorithm, and we incorporate the ancillary data if we need it. In many of the classifications, suppose we add digital elevation model, suppose I add the NDVI values, then my classification is much better. Then afterwards, the checking the accuracy of my output. So what is the authenticity of my results, how accurate my results are, that is important. If required, then we have to actually iteratively repeat the procedure in order to improve the accuracy. So this is the procedure what we are following when we are doing the classification of the data. So this shows here we have 3 band image, band 1, band 2 and band 3 image. The first thing is you are creating a color composite. So once you are creating the color composite, then probably you can identify much more clearly visually the different kind of features which are likely to be present in your area. Then what you are doing is you are using some kind of a classification algorithm, rules, and creating those individual band images to classify them into the homogeneous area. So right side, the color figure what you see is a single map. Now instead of the 3 band input data, now we have only the 1 output, and this output has a certain classification, and the classification is according to the rules which we have defined, according to the homogeneity of the area, and different colors here are indicating the different classes which are present in the area. Now this kind of a map, when we are prepared, we call it a thematic map. It is representing a theme, different themes, and accuracy determination is also very important for such kind of a map. When we prepare them, you have to take it to the field, or you have some ground reference data, you try to compare the two together and determine what is the accuracy of this map before it is used for some applications. So you will learn also in subsequent lecture how to calculate the accuracy of this data. So I was telling you that broadly, there are 2 types of classification which we like to cover: supervised classification technique and unsupervised classification technique. So as clear from the name itself, when we are talking of the supervised classification, that you are supervising it. So there is a supervisor needed, there is a manpower required which can supervise each and every step, right from starting to the end final product. So that is why this is called supervised classification technique, because it requires the human intervention, and lot of input data to the classifier, to the classification algorithm will come from the user community. So very first requirement is the reference data, is the ground data, what we call as the training samples in remote sensing. So this reference data is required in order to create the thematic maps from the classifier. Now on the basis of the ground data or the reference data which we have collected or which is available to us, we will calculate the DN values of those training sample, and we will like to see histogram also. So if we get a uniform kind of a well distributed kind of a histogram, Gaussian type of a histogram, we can be ascertain that the training sets are homogeneous in nature. Then we find out what is the range of the DN values within that homogeneous classes. So we identify the range, and then that becomes the input to the classifier, and once the classification is done, then probably we will convert into the thematic classes. So these are some of the steps now which we are following in supervised classification. We choosing the type of classifier, because again there are different methods under supervised classification. Then we are displaying our 3-band data, we are acquiring the training sets, we are performing the classification, and in one go sometimes the classification is not satisfactory and the accuracy is not that good, or some pixels are unclassified. So we refine our training sets, carry out the accuracy assessment procedure. So these are three broad steps which are shown in this diagram here. So after the selection of the proper kind of spectral bands images, the first stage, very first stage in supervised classification is the training sets, identification of the training sets, and the number, their size, their locations, their placement, they all are important when we are talking of these training samples. Then we take the characteristics of the training samples, particularly the DN values of these, and use that DN value characteristics in the classification. So this becomes the input to the classification algorithms, and on the basis of the range which we have given, it will try to identify, take each and every pixel and try to identify this pixel will belong to which class. So out of the ranges which are available in the input data sets, it will try to classify that pixel into all those classes. So output result could be something like that. Output is, so each pixel has been assigned to a certain class, depends upon the input here. So I'll get at the end a map, a classified map, which is yet to be verified into the field. The accuracy has to be determined, but this is the process which is coming out from the supervised algorithms. So there is a training stage, there is a classification stage, and there is an output stage. So in the training stage, suppose I have to classify the map into land use and land cover classes. So I have to determine how many land use and land cover classes would be there, and what kind of a training data is available to me, and then we are using the DN values to the algorithms in order to classify each pixel into the land cover classes, and then output could be either in the form of a digital map, or I can get the tabular data, I can find out the statistics of each homogeneous class, or I can use that straight away into my GIS database. So when I am talking of the classification scheme, it's very important before we proceed to the classification, before we jump to the classification, it is important to ascertain the level of classification. This example shows for vegetation area. So this is the first level of classification, that my classification output is vegetation, or next category could be, I differentiate in vegetation between the forest, cover vegetation and the shrubland. Then further classification of the forest could be evergreen forest or the deciduous forest. Under evergreen forest, I can further subdivide into different kind of species. So that is called the last level of classification, the fourth level of classification. So according to the level of classification, I will have to make selection of the images. So depending upon the resolution of the images, depending upon the spectral characteristics of the images, I will be able to identify, and also the training sets have to be selected accordingly. So once we have done that, then there are certain guidelines for selecting the training data. Now the training data, as we have explained, in case of the aerial interpretation also, training data actually should be homogeneous. So we have to identify a similar kind of a tone which are appearing on the black and white images and see the spectral similarity. So we have to select the uniform area of the large size. So each training set should be located well distributed in the image. I can use either existing topographical maps or the aerial photographs in order to identify those training sample. So they should be well distributed, they should have a sufficient number, they should be homogeneous, they should be uniform, minimum and the maximum area has to be covered when you are selecting these training samples. Now, uh, this ground truth data or the training samples which you have collected, then this is required for two purposes. One is the training of the algorithm which you are using now. The second part would be the accuracy assessment. So we are using a part of that to train the algorithm, and the remaining part we will use for accuracy assessment. So we will not use the same set of data for both the activities. So this is important. So now another important consideration is what will be my sample size, what will be my sample scheme. So trainings, how big should be the training sample, and what will be my training sampling scheme, because there are many methods which are given in the literature. So training data, as per literature, you will find that there are no fixed guideline, but different literature will give you different criteria. And one literature says that there should be 100 per category, 10n to 100n range, where n is the number of bands. So if I take, let us say, 3 band data for classification, so 10n minimum is the 30. So 30 number of training samples per class are to be required. That is what the literature says, but there are differing opinion about that. It also depends upon the size of the area. It also depends upon the homogeneity of the classes, how big is the class. Then they should be located throughout the image, and how much should be the number of areas for one class. Let us say forest area, how many samples should I go for forest area in the image. So 5 to 10 per category is given. So 5 to 10 samples per category I have to select. Placement should be avoid mixed pixels, take the homogeneous pixels. We can check actually the homogeneity of the pixels with drawing the histogram. So if the training sample histogram we draw, we can check that particular part. So this is shows how you are going to select those training samples on the image whose characteristics is known to you. You know about this area from some reference data. So interactively you can select the training samples. So different colors here are indicating the different categories for which the training samples have been selected, and they are all well distributed, they are all homogeneous, they are all with the different size and the different shape and different orientation. It depends upon the homogeneity of the area which is available to me. Now for each of the training samples, you can see here the training sample has been selected for water, wetland, pine forest, grassy land, road and building. So several training areas have been selected, and these training areas now we can see on the two-dimensional graph which has been plotted between the red and the infrared band, that where they are located. So their location, distribution in the as far as their spectral characteristics of the DN values are concerned, we can cross check the training set. Now if we look at the histogram of those different training sets, so these are the training sets which are shown by the boxes with the different colors. So different kind of a training sets during the ground truth collection, and the right side is showing the histogram of the training set. This is very important in order to find out the purity, in order to find out the homogeneity, whether they are spectrally separable or not. So we can get the different classes here are indicating the different peaks in the data sets. So and they are separable to each other. So we can find out that mostly the curves are different and they are giving me a single peak. So these are all the homogeneous areas which have been selected on the ground. So this is a very important exercise which has been done in order to carry out the proper selection, homogeneous selection of the training sample. So on the left side now, the training sample locations are given for water, for trees, for grassy lands, things like that, and on the right side is the classification of the map. So you can see that the input has been given to the supervised classification, and you are getting finally the map which is classified something like this. So where different colors now which are to be defined by the users, you can allocate different colors to the different themes. Now you are showing the water feature, tree, grass, impervious areas with the different class. So I would say that the right side map is now the thematic map which has been created from the satellite image shown in the left on the basis of the ground truth data or the training data. So I am getting a thematic map at the right side which is called the classified map from supervised classification. Another example which shows me the unclassified data, the raw data, at the top the false color composite, and after supervised classification I am getting the different classes which have been identified, and those different classes have been shown in the legend with a different color. So ultimately my objective is that all the pixels should be classified into some class or the other, and what is the accuracy, that becomes the next step. But in the beginning itself there should not be any pixel which is left unclassified in the area, because that will lead to error. So another example which is showing me, this is the thematic mapper band 3, 4 and 5 data, and the another example here is showing me output which has been created for water feature, for aquatic vegetation cover, urban edges, grassland, bare soil and the forest cover has been shown after the supervised classification. So several training sets have been used in order to classify the images into the thematic map. So this is iterative exercise in a sense that once we identify that some pixels are left unclassified, we have to do it again, or if the accuracy is poor then again we have to do. Now there are various classification methods available in the literature, and these methods are parallelepiped box classifier, it is known as minimum distance to means, and the maximum likelihood classifier. So these are the three popular supervised classification methods which have been used to identify the different classify the data into different classes. So first one is the parallelepiped classifier. In the parallelepiped classifier we will find out actually the mean value, the minimum value and the maximum value within the range. So all the classes which have been shown on the scatter plot, they are separable and their mean values have been shown in the training sets, and also we can find out the minimum value and the maximum value and we can create the box. So this is the box in the 2-dimensional space. The moment I take a 3-dimensional space, I can make a cube kind of a parallelepiped kind of a figure, and that is where the name has been derived from there. So I am taking here the mean value, the minimum value, the maximum values, and then we are finding out that range of acceptable values which are determined from the training sets. What is the minimum value, what is the maximum value, and then once we draw that rectangle, you can see that there is some kind of a overlapping region also. So there is an overlapping region also, so there should not be ideally any overlap between the two in order to correctly classify the pixel. So now the standard deviation in each of the band within that will be determined, and this will be now combined or the merged together will depending upon the overlap which is present between the two values. The second is the minimum distance to mean classifier. So the name itself is clear, minimum distance to mean classification. So it will take the mean value and try to find out the distance, shortest distance between the mean value. So these are the mean values which are shown by the dotted, and the partitioning is shown because here the distance will be calculated, minimum distance criteria will be taken. So this method is slightly slower than the parallelepiped classifier methods, and in this method now the Euclidean distance, this is the main criteria in whenever we find out the separability between the two classes, that will be calculated between the center to center mean of the training samples for the classes which we have identified. So on the basis of the Euclidean distances it will calculate now if this pixel is to be classified, it will calculate where is the minimum distance and it will allocate to that pixel where the distance is minimum. So you can see here there is a one class 1 mean, the class 2 mean, and this is the pixel which is to be identified. Now this pixel will find out where the distance, Euclidean distance, is minimum. So it finds that the distance minimum is toward the class 1. So this pixel will be allocated to the class 1. So this is the exercise which will be done pixel by pixel, and then each pixel will be allocated to the distance where the distance is minimum. So in this figure also pixel 1 is to be classified. So pixel 1 will be classified to the surrounding classes where the distance is minimum. So here the distance is minimum for the crop, so it will be given classification as the crop. The third classification technique is known as the maximum likelihood classifier. Now it is based on the probability function. So it will find out the likelihood of the, so you can see the probability distribution is drawn here around that in the mean classes, and it will take the covariance in order to draw this ellipse. The probability of each pixel belonging to a particular class is calculated. This is the slowest method again compared to the parallelepiped method, but it is theoretically the best method because it is based on the probability, and then there is a certain threshold also which user can define, and on the basis of it will calculate what is the probability the pixel belongs to the nearest of these pixel, and on the basis of the threshold value which has been defined by the user, it will classify the pixel into that particular category. So normally not more than 3 threshold is selected. So within the threshold the pixels within the ellipse will be classified, which will fall outside the ellipse will not be classified. So then in that case one has to maybe change the approach or maybe do the iteration again. So in a nutshell, now the supervised classification methods, they require a lot of ground truth data to carry out the accurate classification, correct classification of the data. Now out of the 3 techniques which I have explained, the parallelepiped technique is faster, but the class order is dependent on that. The maximum minimum distance to mean classifier technique is intermediate in speed and independent of the class order, while the third technique, which is the maximum likelihood classifier, it is most theoretically correct. It gives very accurate result, but it is the slowest. So depending upon the requirement, we can go for the type of the techniques or the type of objects which are present in my data set. We can select the type of the supervised classification method. So this is all about the method classification techniques. Thank you.